In our last lesson, we talked about the introduction to integers. So now that we can get a working definition of them and we know how to graph them, we talked about absolute value and opposites. We're going to start talking about operations with integers, and we'll start with addition. I'm going to break this rule down into two parts, and we'll start first to when the signs are the same. The rule is if the signs are the same, you just add and keep the sign. And let's see a few examples. Well, 6 plus 4 is just 10. And again, the signs are the same. You add and keep the sign. -3 plus -7, signs are the same. You add and keep the sign. I can have more than 2 add-ins. And if the signs are all the same, once again, I add and keep the sign. I see all positives in my next. I'll just add, and my sum will be positive. In the last one on this slide, I have 4 add-ins, and I can just ignore the signs for just a minute. I can do 5 plus 4 plus 1 is 10, plus 5, and again, they're all negative, so I get a -15. So when the sign's the same, the rule is easy. Now, we did mention this briefly in the previous lesson. When you add opposites, their sum is 0. So if I take any number, say 5, add its opposite, -5, it takes me right back to 0. And I indicated that by showing you the number line and going from one to the other. So any number plus its opposite will give me 0. Let's put that into a word problem, or just the realization of if I get into my car in the morning and I drive forward 20 feet and I say, wait a second, I forgot my laptop. I've got to back up 20 feet and I end where I started, which was at 0. Again, before you go anywhere in your car, you're at 0. You accelerate, you start going, you're gaining, that's positive. You retract or go backwards, negative, and we ended up at the origin 0. That leads me into the second definition. Now the first definition is here. If the sum of 2 positive integers is positive, the sum of 2 negative integers is negative, so that we know when the signs are the same, you just add and keep the sign. Here's a rule that we want to refresh our memories on. To add integers with different signs, you find the difference. What does that mean? You subtract. You subtract their absolute values. Now, to figure out what sign the ending result will be, is we take the sign of the integer that had the greater absolute value. It looks like the bigger number. All right, let's give this a practice. Here are my first 6 problems. Test them out. We're looking at unlike signs. I'll subtract and keep the sign of the greater absolute value. Well, 7 is further from the origin than 3 is, -3 is, so that's why it's positive. We go to the next one. I have -6 plus 2, unlike signs. I'll subtract and keep the sign of the greater absolute value. My third one, again, signs are unlike, subtract and keep the sign of the greater absolute value. On to the next column. Unlike signs, subtract, +1. Unlike signs, subtract, -2. Unlike signs, subtract, +8. And I'm sure you have all worked with this rule before. I'm going to take this one step further today. I'm going to look at when there are more than 2 add-ins. If I'm looking at more than 2 add-ins, I could use my left to right rule of PEMDAS, but instead I'm going to look for the same signs. I'm going to try to make my life a little easier. If the signs are the same, I'm going to combine those first. So if I look at this first one, I'm probably going to add these first, so I'm going to keep that 10. I see like signs, which means I just add and keep the sign. And now notice I have a number and its opposite, which gives me 0. On to our next. I noticed this one has a negative in the front and a negative in the back. Well, I'm going to rewrite this one. You don't have to, but I think sometimes it makes it easier. I'm going to have negative 5 plus a negative 1 plus 8. Why did I do that? Now my same signs are together. Now I have unlike signs, and I get my answer. I find it, especially in the beginning, easier to do it this way so that we're not always have to be mindful of the rule, but could do it maybe in less steps. I see my negatives are in the middle. I can simply keep them that way if I like, or I'm going to just sort of move them over. I'm going to get negative 4 plus negative 5 is negative 9. And positive 6 plus positive 6 is 12. One final step, unlike signs, subtract and keep the sign of the greater absolute value, and done. Now, there can be more numbers, there can be fractions in here, but right now we're sticking with integers. Let's do one last one to end this lesson. Again, I see positives and negatives, so I'm just going to use my commutative property. I'm just going to relocate so I can have a whole series of numbers. I'm going to add my positives first. 15 plus 2 is 17. I'm now going to take care of my negatives because they're the same sign. I've got negative 4 plus negative 5 plus negative 8 will give me a negative 17. And I start where I end up where I started because I'm now adding something plus its opposite or additive inverse, and I'm ending with 0 again. So on that note, I'm going to end our lesson. We've had a great week. Thank you. Enjoy your weekend.